Interstate rest area and truck stop employees. What's the most bizarre story you have? Part 2. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I worked at a weigh station for big rigs. There were 2 of us at the station working nights waiting for trucks to pull onto the scale. If anything weighing more than a pound got on the scale, it would send an audible beep into the booth and light up the computers. If it wasn't a truck, then most of the time it would be wildlife wandering out onto the scale, which we would ignore, then quickly go back to watching Netflix or whatever. One night, though, it was something weighing 132 pounds. We couldn't see it from the windows, but checking the cameras, we noticed it was a hunched-over naked man shaking like a shitting dog and scratching the side of his face. While my coworker radioed for the state troopers, I used the intercom to tell him to get off the scale. Instead, he lurched on over and began licking the window. He did this until he was checked out by EMS and taken away by law enforcement for public intoxication. It was later discovered he was using meth. Shock. Years ago, when I was a kid, we were traveling with my mom, her best friend, and my sisters. We were pretty tired and pulled into a truck stop for some food and bathroom break. We walk in. My mom asks a guy where the bathrooms were. He points us in the right direction, and off we toddle. We come out, take a seat, and wait for the waitress to come take our order. She seems to be taking a while, but we figure she's probably busy and will come when she can. Eventually, she comes over and tells my mom that everything is okay and the police are on their way. My mom, pretty confused, asks her what she means. Well, turns out we'd walked into the middle of an armed robbery, and my mom had actually asked the robber where the toilets were. At least he told her. Not me, but my dad managed a truck stop for a year or so. At this truck stop, drivers could get a shower, but it's timed since there are usually multiple people waiting to get one as well. One day, the guy is showering and his time is up, but he didn't come out. One of the employees knocked and requested he come out so the next person could shower, but still no response. They eventually entered the shower to find the man dead. It turned out that he had suffered a major heart attack while he was in there. Another one, and apparently this is somewhat common, a truck transporting honeybees left the shop, but the queen from one of the hives had taken residence in or around the pump while the truck was stopped. They had to get a beekeeper out to capture and move the queen and her colony before they could let anyone near the fuel pumps. Overnight shift supervisor 15 years ago. On Valentine's Day, then 18 years old, I was the only lonely motherfucking shift supervisor to be able to work second shift at McD's rest area because, again, lonely with no date. I'm half asleep, working the shift. Guy comes in high as a kite. Actually, he's higher than kites can go. He orders his food and leaves. An hour later, my cleaning guy, we'll call him Pedro, tells me there's a guy on the toilet that won't come out. We go in, keep knocking, and we're thinking he's sleeping on the shitter. We can see his pants around his ankles, and he's leaning down. While I go call the cops, I tell my cleaning guy to block the bathroom so no one goes into that part of it. There's 2 sides to the bathroom. Pedro comes out and tells me the guy is purple and dead on the shitter. He overdosed on something, not sure what. The kicker is that Pedro decided it was in his best interest to run the guy's pockets before the cops show up, which is how he found out the guy was dead. Pedro took the guy's stash of money before leaving. I found out a week later as I overheard it through the crew talking. Fun times at that place. Felt bad for the guy. I wouldn't want to go out that way. Not one anymore, but when I was a maintenance worker for a truck stop, I got a call over the radio saying there were 2 women in the parking lot covered in chocolate. I thought, well, as long as they don't come into the store. I went outside to find 2 women, completely naked, covered in a brown substance. I hope to God it was chocolate. The sheriff was called, and apparently they were both completely sober. They were there for a sorority thing. They were issued a ticket, and it was indeed chocolate. Another one was a woman came to the counter and said someone stole her car. We called the sheriff, and while we waited, I found she parked her car in the parking lot way in the back while she went to a nearby city with some girlfriends. When the sheriffs arrived, they couldn't find a trace of her car, broken window, skid marks, etc., and assumed someone must have had a key to the door was open or picked. He did some investigating around the spot and found her car in the ravine she was parked next to. Apparently, a truck backed up, didn't know it hit something, and pushed it off the embankment. Took 2 wreckers to pull it out. The person who pushed it off was never found. I have a ton of crazy stories from that job, and I only worked there a year. Those are just the two that stood out to me. Not an employee of one, but a friend of mine from high school and I were cruising the back roads of our town and having a good time listening to music and just cruising. We decided to stop off at the truck stop in one of the towns we had ended up in and get some food and drinks. Suddenly, she comes up to me excited and freaking out. I ask her what's wrong, and she tells me she just seen Lance Bass of NSYNC go into the men's room. I tell her I honestly doubt that, considering this was a small rural truck town and it's 1 a.m. So, we get our food and sit in her car parked in the front of the entrance. As we're eating, a solid 45 minutes has gone by, and I tell her she must be seeing shit. Then, suddenly the door opens, and sure as shit, it was Lance Bass. She rolls down the window and screams, "I love you, Lance!" And he turns around and smiles and waves at her. Proceeded to walk over to a large, unmarked tour bus and get on it, then leave. That was a crazy night. I didn't work there, but I was at a truck stop in West Virginia when a very fat trucker was trying to buy a Twix bar from the vending machine. He paid for it, but the bar got stuck on the last loop of the dispenser, so the trucker starts shaking the machine. Don't try this ever. And it comes toppling down onto his legs, pinning him to the floor. "Ah, fuck," he says nonchalantly. Everyone hears the crash and comes rushing over to help while the worker calls 911. It's at this point the trucker realizes that the glass on the machine is broken, so he reaches between his legs under the machine, feels around and grabs a Twix bar from the machine. This dude just lies there completely unconcerned about being pinned to the floor and starts eating the candy. A worker says he should try to stay still until help arrives, but the trucker responds with, "Fuck off, I paid for it already." By the time the fire department arrived and pried the vending machine off of him, this fucker had eaten all the Twix bars in the machine, as well as some Doritos and cookies. An EMT brought out a stretcher to take this guy to the ambulance, but the trucker says he has a deadline to meet and that the ambulance won't be necessary. He gets up, somehow relatively unscathed, hands the worker 20 and says, "Thanks for dinner, bro," then hops in his truck and leaves. My dad retold me a story that my grandpa told him today. This post is a weird coincidence. We're guessing this took place in the 70s. My grandpa knew these two antique dealers. They were husband and wife. They drove themselves from a neighboring state to Texas to look for more stuff to bring back to their antique store. While they were in between towns, they stopped at a rest stop, eating lunch, looking at the map so they can decide where to go next, standard stuff. There was only them and one semi-truck. The driver of the truck approached them saying, "Hey, my truck's broken down and I've been stuck out here for hours. I could really use your help. I need to buy or replace this part, and if you take me there, I can get a taxi to bring me back." "Yeah, sure, no problem." So they're in the van again. The husband's driving, wife's in the passenger seat, and the truck driver in the back. When they pull out of the rest stop, the man in the back pulls a gun on the husband and says he wants their money. They kept most of their money in their glove box, so the wife reaches in with both hands, money in one hand, a gun in the other. She hands the truck driver the money, and while he's distracted by the amount they had on them, she slid the gun into her husband's lap. I believe the husband turned around and shot the truck driver a couple of times, and the truck driver shot the husband. The truck driver died, and the husband lived, but the bullet almost went through his right eye. So now they're in between towns. The husband has been shot, they have a dead man in the back seat, and now they have to find a hospital. An hour or so later, they find an emergency room, and the wife says, "I need you to help my husband because he's been shot, and I need you to call the police because the man who shot him is dead in the back of my van." So they take care of my husband, the police show up, they drag the body out, the wife explains the whole situation. The police go to the rest stop to check the inside of the semi. The actual truck driver was shot dead and was put back in the truck. They think that the robber didn't know how to drive it, so they waited at the rest stop, hoping someone would pull up in something he did know how to drive. So, this is a story from my 90-year-old grandpa, so I don't know how much he's telling tales or how much this story has been exaggerated over the years. Either way, it was crazy to listen to. TL, DR, a couple almost got robbed at gunpoint, killed the man that tried to rob them. LOL, funny. My son, daughter, best friend, and I all work at the same rest area. My son had a guy stay in the restroom for about 3 hours. When he finally left, there were 3 empty bottles of water and an empty bag of Teddy Grahams. Best friend found a dead trucker, no foul play, just died of a heart attack and was there for so long she checked on him. I was cleaning one of the women's restrooms one day and heard screaming from the lobby. Went out, and a lady's jeans on her thigh were ripped to shreds, and she had multiple lacerations in her thigh, like to the point you could see the fat coming out. Some guy had walked by her with a dog, and the dog just lunged at her and grabbed her. She said the guy yelled at her for it and said she shouldn't have walked that close to the dog on a public sidewalk, and left. She didn't have a description of him, really didn't know what kind of car he got into or anything, but yeah, the guy just left. Then she didn't want to wait for police or an ambulance or anything, and I tried to talk her into at least going to the nearest doctor or emergency room, but no, she decided to drive on to her daughter's house like an hour and a half away, bleeding and with her fat coming out of her thigh. There was really nothing I could do to stop her, so I got some bandages from our first aid kit and sent her on her way. It's usually pretty boring. Edited to add a couple of weeks ago, we had some plumbing issues, so we had no water at our rest area or the one westbound across the interstate. But the Department of Transportation says we aren't allowed to close, so we were going in after people and flushing toilets with a 5-gallon bucket from huge trash cans filled with water, until we ran out of water to flush with, and people were still using the restrooms. So glad I didn't have to work the cleanup for that. Imagine having to do that and having no water to wash your hands during a pandemic, and I've seen more coworkers high on shit than truckers. I've been working at a truck stop Burger King for about 2 years now. The pay is decent for a teenager such as myself, but the experiences at my location have been rather odd at times. The most bizarre thing that I've had happen at work goes as follows. I'm in the kitchen making chicken nuggets for an order when all of a sudden 3 police cars pull up, an ambulance and 2 fire trucks. The police sergeant and fire chief come over rather frantically to the front desk and tell us that we need to evacuate the location within 10 minutes or a potential chemical threat could either blow us up or poison us. Now, you might be asking what the chemical threat was. We don't know. Still to this day, we do not know. All the information that we were given was that a tanker truck with some pretty hazardous chemicals pulled in and flipped over and began to leak. The weirdest part of it is that the driver was missing and the truck was seemingly abandoned. The cops did a full investigation with CCTV footage and nobody was able to locate the driver or even identify the guy, mainly because nobody saw who the hell he was or where he went. After about 5 minutes of throwing everything away and making sure I've gotten my stuff and clocked out, I see 2 white vans pull up, and out come 6 guys in hazmat suits. They all sprint over to the truck yard, and the cops are blocking it off and evacuating the rest of us out of the building and parking lot. Not sure what exactly it was that happened, but I sure as hell wish the drone footage I captured with my friends D and B after I got off showed more. What about something non-employees witnessed? I entered the men's room at a rest stop and saw a trucker fully nude in front of the sinks giving himself a ghetto bath, soaped up and rinsed himself off, 1 hand scoop of water at a time. I feel bad for whoever had to clean that up afterwards. I have so many. We had a guy come in with 4 stab marks to his chest, and all he wanted to do was call his mom. We called the cops for him, and it turned out that his girlfriend had stabbed him. When the cops showed up, they told him to just go home. One of my coworkers had a gun pulled on him because he opened a can of soda and it made a loud pop that had scared the customer. Had this person accidentally put their car in drive instead of reverse, and they drove into the store. The power went out in the store. As a protocol, we have to evacuate when that happens. We had a customer screaming at the top of her lungs that we were trying to sexually assault her when we tried to get her to leave the store. A semi-truck driver drove over 2 of our gas pumps because she couldn't turn correctly, and then she fled the scene. Gas was literally spilling everywhere. Luckily, we caught it all on video, so we were able to contact her company and get her to take responsibility for the damages. I'm not an employee, but I had an odd encounter with someone who claimed to be one. When I was 19-year-old female, I was driving home to California via I-80 through Wyoming. It was getting late, and I was beyond tired. I pulled over to the side of the interstate, and I set my alarm for 15 minutes so I could take a nap and then continue on to the next town. It's important to note that I normally wear contacts, but I've been wearing my glasses and I took them off to sleep. I can't read a sign 2 feet in front of myself without them. I fall asleep. I'm awoken by a tap on the window. I started feeling around for my glasses, but I knocked them to the floor of the car. A second knock. I thought it might be the police, even though I didn't see lights. I didn't know if it was legal to park on the side of the highway. I rolled down my window a couple of inches, but I couldn't see anything about this person without my glasses. They asked if everything was all right, and I said yes. I still think this might be law enforcement, so I was being hella respectful. But then he told me that he recognized me. I said, "No, you don't." He said he worked up the road at a rest stop or gas station, and he had just seen me fill up my tank. I hadn't filled up in the entire state of Wyoming. I drove a yellow VW Beetle with some pretty significant damage to the rear bumper. He insisted he recognized my car. At this point, I knew he wasn't law enforcement, and I knew he was lying, so I started making my replies short. Then he asks if I want a ride. I say no. He offered to drive me to the nearest hotel. I said no. He was very insistent. Finally, I asked if I was doing anything wrong or illegal. He said no and left. Could have been a totally normal dude, but it freaks me out to think about it now. A few years later, the scariest thing about it to me is how I wouldn't have been able to go to the police with a description if something had happened because of my lack of 20/20. Be careful out there, everyone.